there doesn't seem to be a lot of self-criticism now. And I say very specifically that, for example, there are whole areas of the past that are just off limits for discussion and debate. You don't hear any discussion about the Great Famine. You don't hear any discussion about the Cultural Revolution, certainly not 1989. And it almost seems as if everything started with the opening and reforms. Nobody ever wants to talk about what came before. Is that healthy?
大家好，我是老吴。今天我们来看一段非常精彩的访谈片段，主角是李世默先生。这段访谈是在2021年底，也就是中国共产党100年党庆前夕录制的。主持人是当时的香港外国记者会主席基思李奇伯格，他是一位资深的媒体人，有多年的国际报道经验，对中国的了解也很深。这场对话他可以说是准备充分，提问也相当尖锐。在这段访谈开头，李世默先发表了一段演说，阐述了他眼中中共的自我革新能力，以及如何赢得当代中国青年的认同。随后主持人就开始了他的犀利提问，比如中国年轻人入党到底是出于什么目的？中共为什么不允许公开讨论像文革、六四这样的历史敏感话题？中共真的有西方意义上的自我批评机制吗？那么面对这位老练记者的连环提问，李世默是怎么一一拆招，又怎么清晰表达自己的观点？接下来我们一起来看看这场精彩的对话。
So there's an old saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And the Chinese Communist Party is about to reach 100 years of age. As a political organization, though, is it getting old? Or is it still young and therefore can learn new tricks? I'd like to explore the answer to this question, and that would determine the answer to the larger question posed as a title to this talk. The past 5 to 10 years have been a transformative era for China, both in terms of its self-perception and its perceived relations with the world. The changes that have been taking place have far-reaching implications, I think. And I like to argue that this transformation is driven, at least in decisive part, by the party's undertaking of a major self-reinvention. Actually, self-reinvention has been a hallmark of the party. I count at least 2 major self-reinventions in the past. One was in 1949, when the party transformed itself from a revolutionary fighting force into a governing institution. Few predicted it would last, but it did. The second was in 1979, as we all know, when the party reinvented itself from a closed and centrally planned economy manager to a market economics reformer. I'd like to suggest that a third one is taking place right now. And the most important aspect of this current reinvention of the party is that it is winning the hearts and minds of China's youth. In terms of China's own development, now the most significant event was the 19th Party Congress in 2017. It was then that China officially declared a paradigm shift, namely from a single-minded pursuit of economic development to the goal of achieving more balanced development and what is called common prosperity. Now, this pivot did not come out of blue. It was the culmination of economic and social developments some years in the making. China's headlong pursuit of economic growth in the last 30 to 40 years since Deng Xiaoping's reforms had achieved tremendous results, as we all know. But new challenges also emerge as results or side effects of market economics. Official corruption, inequality, and environmental degradation, to name 3 major ones. Now, corruption was tackled ferociously beginning with the 18th Party Congress in 2012, with notable results. On the social and economic fronts, we have observed significant social trends taking place in Chinese society, especially among young people. Those who were born post-90 and post-2000, the so-called 90后 and 00后. Now, they're qualitatively different generations from previous generations, from my generations, for instance. They've grown up with a lot of education in a China that has been increasingly prosperous and strong. As opposed to my own generation, we were primarily concerned with China being poor and lacking development, so we wanted market economics to propel development, almost no matter what the costs. Now, these new generations, they see the main challenges to them and Chinese society as a whole rooted in inequality. There are many significant signs that indicate young people's perception of capital and market have turned negative, and their support for socialism and communism have increased markedly. Now, the party is seeking to get ahead of the trend and rebalance economic gains to build a more equitable society. The intense campaign to eradicate extreme poverty in the entire Chinese nation was historic and unprecedented. The recent government initiatives to rein in monopolistic companies is another example of effort from the other end. It's called containing the unchecked power of capital. I believe we're only seeing the beginning of this paradigm shift. This presents a challenge to the party. China's young generations want to fix inequality, but also they desire economic opportunities that will continue to raise their standard of living. So the country needs to continue on this path of sustained economic growth for obvious reasons. Now, how to achieve a more equitable society of common prosperity while at the same time keep China's society entrepreneurial, which is essential for further growth, is the challenge. And this is the trend that we ought to watch. Another paradigm shift has occurred in the same period, and it was China's perception about the world and its relations with it, especially the West. I would probably put the pivoting moment at 2016. The Trump era showed the Chinese people in America that was so drastically different from the perception they had for many decades. My generation looked up to America, and many even advocated China change its political system and ideology in favor of liberalism. Now, young generations today, they see an America that is rather belligerent toward China, of course, and that is poorly governed, with inequality problems worse than China's own, with politics that seems so dysfunctional and society so polarized and hostile from within, and a bit of a bully on the world stage. So as I said before, the post-90 and 2000 generations are very different. So their perceptions of America and the West are fundamentally different from ours when we were at their age. And several significant recent events helped to consolidate this shift. One was the pandemic, of course, how China handled it and how it was attacked initially and to this day. And they see how the US and Europe have handled it. And then came the attacks on China with regards to Hong Kong and Xinjiang. I'm not here to debate the specifics of these issues or the merits of these issues. I'm just pointing out that the Western attacks on these two issues have caused a near total loss of their credibility in the Chinese public. A vast majority of Chinese public resent the Hong Kong protests and the violence. That's just a fact. And everyone here knows the Uyghur population of Xinjiang has more than doubled. And for Western government and the media to call it a genocide seems totally politically motivated. So, for many years, Western criticism of China did have some support within the Chinese public, especially among the commercial and intellectual elites, because some of these criticisms resonated and the Chinese knew they had problems. But this time is different. This time they see a portrayal of China in the West that is so dramatically different from the China they live and experience every day, especially among the young people. As I said, the post-90s and 2000 generations are more patriotic and more confident to begin with, and they respond naturally to the party's call for greater confidence in China's own path. Indeed, contemporary Chinese youth are on course to be the strongest supporters within Chinese society of the party's long-held goal of pursuing China's own development path, both politically and economically. I would argue that today's Chinese youth, their dispositions and their inclinations are more in sync with the party's outlook and intent than ever before. Nearly 400 million strong, the post-90s and post-2000s, the 90hos and 00hos, 400 million of them, they form the backbone of China's future. And the party's current vigorous self-reinvention is placing itself at the vanguard of Chinese youth. This indicates that it is still young indeed. The question is, can the party harness this synergy with China's new generations and turn it into effective governance for the long term? The party needs to steer the raw energy and aspirations of China's youth toward productive socialism and away from excessive populism, toward healthy patriotism and away from narrow nationalism. If it can do this, it will deliver on the material and spiritual aspirations of China's new generations. And as a result, I think will stay in power for a very long time to come. Now, success is not assured, but I wouldn't bet against it. Thank you, Keith.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. We've got a lot to pick apart there. So thanks for agreeing to take some of our questions. You know, this question of whether China can keep growing and whether the party can stay in power is occupying everybody. You know, I'm a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and this just came out, the latest edition of Foreign Affairs. The cover is, "Can China keep rising?" So everybody's asking. That. You have that too. So everybody's asking the same questions. A lot of questions in there. Let me pick apart the membership of the party. First of all, it's 92 million members, according to a survey recently by Zhongnan University, I believe. They said of the 2.1 million new members that came in 2015. Only something like 5,700 were migrant workers, and the vast majority were actually urban white collar people from Shanghai, where you are, Beijing, et cetera. So my question is, does this party have any relation to the Marxist-Leninist party that was founded in 1921 that was supposed to be workers and peasants? I mean, what's Marxist-Leninist about it now?
Well, good question. Obviously, it's still a Marxist party. Its ideology is both Chinese tradition and Marxism. What's called the sinification of Marxism. Now, I'll give you another number. Of the new members of the Chinese in 2019, okay, nearly 2 million new members, new people joined the party. 80% of them are people under age of 35. Okay, so it's a very, very young trend. And those young people, of course, if you know, in China, and most of them are college students. Now, 80%, last year, 80% of all college students in China express a strong interest in joining the party. Okay, so if you know Chinese society, we have the college entrance exam, Gaokao, okay, which is, you know, one line equal to everybody. And if you visit Chinese college campuses, you'll know these kids come from all backgrounds. Unlike, you know, universities and colleges you find in many Western countries, they come from wealthy families, mostly from certain races. Mostly, I think. I mean, of course, they have affirmative action in America, but we all know. But in China, college students, those who enter college from, you know, vast different backgrounds, from poor, rich, urban, rural, all sorts of places. And 80% of them want to join the party. So I think the party still is very much with the vast majority of the Chinese people.
Well, let me continue on that, because this Zhongnan University and a couple of others, Zhongnan I'm looking at specifically, they surveyed 1,800 new party members and asked them why they joined the party. And the vast majority said career advancement. So they weren't joining it because they believed in the ideals. They were joining it because they wanted to get a better job. And, you know, they thought when you're applying for a job, it's better to be a party member. Is that really meaning that they're believing in the ideals of the party, or they're just doing it to advance their careers?
Well, there's nothing wrong with that. And I hope that the two coincide. I hope those who believe in making China a better society also find better jobs.
Fair enough. And let me ask you, the reinvention, I think, and I agree with you, I think one thing about the Communist Party is it's reinvented itself several times in the past. But another one of the strengths of the Communist Party, as far as I know it, and I've been looking at it for 4 decades going back now, has always been self-criticism. They've always gone back and self-criticized when things and said, look, we made mistakes, now we're correcting those mistakes. There doesn't seem to be a lot of self-criticism now. And I say very specifically that, for example, there are whole areas of the past that are just off limits for discussion and debate. You don't hear any discussion about the Great Famine. You don't hear any discussion about the Cultural Revolution, certainly not 1989. And it almost seems as if everything started with the opening and reforms. Nobody ever wants to talk about what came before. Is that healthy?
Well, let me disagree with that.
Okay.
I think there's a extraordinarily high degree of self-criticism within the party right now through this self-reinvention. Okay, now, first of all, self-criticism is only useful when it's relevant. and let me just point out, the parties have been engaged in three major areas of self-criticism since the 18th Party Congress. One is political corruption. Okay, from 2012 on, every single newspaper, every single television, you can't get away from Chinese official media without reading and hearing about the horrible situation with corruption. And they attacked it because of that self-criticism. Okay, second, environmental degradation. Okay, you can't get away from media reports from the party itself about we got to fix the environment, we screwed up. Okay, and anybody who lives in Beijing will tell you how much improvement they've had in their air in the past 5, 6, 7 years. Okay, 10, 20 years, 10, 15 years ago, you go to Beijing, you can hardly catch a day with blue sky. Now most days are blue sky. Okay, self-criticism. Third, most important right now, inequality. Okay, the last campaign to eradicate extreme poverty in the country, the campaign lasted about 8 years. They took the last 99 million people out of absolute poverty. Mm-hmm. Nearly 2,000 party members died in the process. Okay, several million of them went to the front lines. They went to rural areas with harsh conditions. Okay, so why did they do that? Self-criticism. They realized there was a problem, that economic reforms have lifted a lot of people, made a lot of rich people, and built this great big middle class, but many millions of people were left behind. And there was something wrong with that. So the entire campaign was driven by self-criticism.
Yeah, fair enough. Those are all three fair points of self-criticism. I guess what I'm thinking about is, and again, bear with me here for a second, if you look at what's happening in the United States now, where they've had a lot of historical problems with slavery, racism, they're going through this cathartic moment where they're discussing all of these issues. Europe as well, after the Black Lives Matter movement, Europe is going through a reckoning with its own past of colonialism, et cetera. In China, it seems, again, the past is always blocked off. Nobody wants to talk about it. It's not open for discussion. You can't talk about. They even try to crush any memory of what happened in 1989. When will China have that kind of historical reckoning? When will the party go back and say, look, we made some mistakes? That doesn't diminish their power now.
Well, race is always a big problem in America. I know that's from the country's DNA. So I think I will support a greater discussion in America. And that came very late. Come on. When did Lincoln live? 150 years ago? Whenever it was. Okay, now you're doing this and you call it self-criticism and you're asking China when you're going to do it about 1989? Come on, cut people some slack.
Well, I think we didn't wait until after. It's been since Lincoln that we've discussed race in America.
I'm sure things that have happened in the history of the People's Republic will be discussed much sooner than how soon you address the race problems in America.
好，我们先看到这里。李世默这一段关于中共自我革新和历史观的分析，内容可以说是相当的充实。面对主持人连珠炮式的提问，关于中共的生命力、自我革新以及怎么看待历史等敏感话题，他给出了自己独到的看法。他强调，中共能够持续生存，靠的是不断的自我调整和自我革新，尤其是能够获得新一代年轻人的支持。他还列举了反腐、环保和脱贫等例子，说明中共有能力面对问题，进行改革。谈到历史问题，他的态度是对历史的反思需要时间，也需要合适的方式进行。总的来说，李世默对这些核心问题的回应相当清楚有力，也展现出他对中国政治和社会的深入理解。其实提问越直接，越能激发更深入的思考。那接下来主持人还会问出哪些更有挑战性的问题，李世默又会怎么回应？这些内容我们会在下一集继续为大家分享。今天的分享就到这里，感谢大家收看，我们下次见。